Hi everyone and welcome. Today I'm going to do a spoiler-free review for the Ash and Sand trilogy by Richard Nell. This is a self-published grimdark series that consists of Kings of Paradise, Kings of Ash and Kings of Heaven. I actually participated in a read-along a couple of months ago for this series, and because of that I do have some spoiler-filled discussion videos for each of the books separately that I will link in the description box down below. But like I said, those are spoiler-filled, so first let me convince you to pick up this series and then come back to watch those videos if you want to. And I'm going to start with convincing you by telling you about the premise of the first book. In Kings of Paradise we meet our two main characters, Ruka and Kale. These are two young boys at the start when we meet them, and they live on two different places, two different parts of this world. They actually have no idea of the other one's existence. We first meet Ruka, and Ruka lives in exile together with his mother. And they actually became exiles because Ruka has some physical abnormalities that make the people of the Ascom, where he lives, believe that he is possessed by evil. So you can see that his childhood is not going to be the happiest. He is very lonely, he doesn't really know other children, and when they do get into towns, he is treated very harshly. And because of this, he gets shaped as the person who he is when he grows up. This is a coming-of-age story of both of these boys. And you see that he has some goals that he wants to achieve growing up. He wants to change the world in a certain way. On the other hand, we meet Kale. Kale lives in the islands, and he's actually the son of one of the kings of these islands. So because of this, he of course has a lot of privileges that Ruka does not have, and it might seem in the beginning that he has an easy life. But as a prince, he cannot decide anything of his own. He cannot decide who he wants to marry, he cannot decide what he wants to become when he grows up. All of this is decided for him. And because of this, you can see that there's a lot of friction between Kale and his father. So it's very interesting to see that you have these boys who couldn't be more different from one another, but both of them have hardships that they need to face while growing up. And all in all, this first book is more than anything a coming-of-age story where you meet and get to know these two characters and the world. Like I said, you have these two different places. You have the Ascom and the islands. They are very different from one another. The culture is very different. The religion is very different. Everything about it is different, and you get to know all of that, which is extensive world building in the first book. So because of that, the plot does take a little bit of a backseat in that first book, and that does mean that the first book is dense and the pacing is a little bit slower. But the plot takes off in the second book. It actually takes until the end of the first book to know why all of the small things that are happening in that first book actually are important and what they mean to the overall plot, and why you're following these two different individuals and how this comes together. But then in the second one, when you know what the plot is going to be, the overall idea, because nothing is certain in this world, the pacing takes off, and actually the second book is my favorite book of the entire trilogy. It does something that I quite enjoy, which is in the first book you meet some people, you have some plot points that are important, and you think that you know what the story is going to be. You have an idea of these characters, secondary characters, primary characters, and you think that you know them. But then in the second book, you get additional information, and this changes your entire perspective. I loved it. Now, the second book is my favorite, but that doesn't mean that the ending wasn't good, because it was amazing. Something that Richard Nell does very well is just having twist after twist, but you cannot know that beforehand. I think that, in general, I don't like books where you have the good, you have the bad, and you know what's going to happen because the good guys always win. But on the other hand, I don't like the exact same thing, which is the exact opposite, but it has the same effect, where you know that the people that you are following just cannot catch a break, ever. And because of that, you're not really invested, because you know that it's going to end badly. And I think that Richard Nell has a perfect balance of the two, where there's just enough hope and just enough good in this world that, yes, it ends more badly than not, but you do have those good moments as well, so you remain invested. I think that this coming-of-age grimdark story is something that I quite enjoy, and it's very reminiscent of Bloodsong by Anthony Ryan, for example. I think that The Poppy War by R.F. Kuang, just the first book, is a great example as well. And I would even go as far as to say that people who like the Farseer trilogy by Robin Hobb might also enjoy this series, especially if you also like grimdark, of course. Because yes, this is grimdark, and for that I do want to give a little bit more explanation, because in the first chapter of Kings of Paradise, the first book, you have one of our main characters that is cooking and eating a small child. This is very dark, and I know that some people are put off by that. But I would say that this is maybe one of the darkest moments in the entire trilogy, because you don't really know what's going on and you don't know this character and their reasons yet. Now, I'm not going to say that cannibalism is good. don't worry. But when you get to know these characters and get to know the harsh world that they live in, I don't think that anything that happens is as dark as that first scene. So I would say that this is maybe grimdark medium. It's definitely a step up from the First Law trilogy, for example, but it's not like the Manifest Delusions series at all. These characters are not beyond redemption, and you do get and understand their reasons. So don't be alarmed by that first scene, and definitely read a little bit more and then see what you think of it. Now, when we then go over to writing style and some of the technical choices that the author made, it might be interesting to know that this series is written in third-person past tense, like most fantasy books, and that we have multiple POVs. Now, something that I do like that Richard Nell does here as well is that you have just a small amount of POVs in the first book, and you have enough time with one POV to get to know that character and become invested in that character before an additional POV is introduced. And then in the second book, you might have some secondary characters of the first book that you were already intrigued by that now get their own POV. So this gets built up very gradually, which is something that I enjoy more than a series that starts with more than 10 POVs from the get-go, which can be a little bit confusing, and that's definitely not the case here. Now, when we go over to the writing style, I think that this is very decent. This was very enjoyable, especially the description of the world made you feel like you were there. The Ascom is supposed to feel empty and cold, and when you are reading about the Ascom, the writer can really make you feel that. The islands are supposed to feel hot and very cramped, and you feel that while you are reading it. So that's definitely something that I quite enjoyed. When we then go over to the pacing, like I said, I do think that that first book is a little bit slower paced because you do have the attention that's on the characters and the world building. But then the second and the third book are a lot faster paced. There is some action, there are some battles, and they are written in a way that I quite enjoy it, where you're seeing the battles through the eyes of one of the characters, either a character that's standing on the side or a character that's actively in that battle. And I do think that that just adds my investment. It's not a military fantasy where you see the two factions coming together, but you don't really see the individuals. Here you see the individuals, and each of the battles means something. I don't like books where you have battle after battle, and you could basically scrap 3/4 of the battles, and the story would be the same. Here, each battle is very significant for the overall story, so you are invested in all of them. But if you're looking for an action-packed series where you have a lot of battles, where it's super fast-paced, you have a lot of action, that's definitely not here. You also have political intrigue and you have some slower moments as well. But overall, I do think that the pacing is very stable and that when it's a little bit slower paced, it's necessary for what the author is trying to convey. Now I want to go a little bit deeper into world building, fantastical elements, and magic system. And like I said, the world building is exquisite, it's very extensive. You get the complete picture of both the Ascom as the islands. You not only get the description of how the world looks, you also get a description of the culture, you get a description of the religion, and you get just a description of these people and how they live in total. Even in the Ascom, you have different spaces, and depending on where you live, your culture might be a little bit different. So I just completely enjoyed that, and I do think that if you're a fan of world building and especially of religion that's tied into it, I do think that this is a great series to pick up. Now, when we then go over to fantastical elements, I wouldn't say that this world, other than that, of course, this story does not take place on Earth, I wouldn't say that you have a lot of fantastical elements. You don't have any magical beings or anything like that. The world is very closely related to our own, but to extremes, where, like I said, the Ascom is very cold, the islands are very hot. But other than that, no fantastical elements. The magic here really takes place in the magic system. I'm not going to say too much about it, other than that most people in this world do not have magic, only a few individuals have, but we do focus on these individuals, and because of that, this story does feel like high fantasy. Now, we don't really know a lot about the magic system when we are introduced to it, because the characters that we follow don't really know anything either. So these are actually hard magic systems, but in the beginning we don't know what the limitations are and we don't know what we can actually do with this magic system. But as the story progresses, this really takes shape. And that's something that I like, where you get to know the magic system together with these characters. And you actually have different types of magic in this world. You have elemental magic, where of course the person can draw strength from the earth, from the wind, stuff like that. We also have magic that's a little bit tied into the afterlife, and we have people who can look into the future. You have different things, and it all ties in very nicely with religion as well, which, if you know me, you know that I love that. So all in all, if you're looking for a very hard and lined magic system from the get-go, you're not going to get that here. But the magic systems that are being introduced in this trilogy are one of the most unique ones that I have read about. So if that's something that you're looking for, you are going to find it here. And then last but not least, of course, I am going to talk about the characters. So like I said, we have our two characters, which are our main characters, Kale and Ruka, but more characters get introduced throughout the book. And in the first book already, you actually have a female character, Dala, and I would say that she's not one of the two main characters, but she does play a very important role, and I would maybe call her the third main character. So if you're looking for a fantasy series where you also have some female main characters, that's definitely the case here as well. Now, I wouldn't say that it's completely balanced, completely 50-50. There are more male characters here, but like I said, you have some battles here, you have some action, and just because of the world and how it's built up, you are going to have more male characters in that faction. But like I said, the Ascom has a matriarchy and you have some very powerful women there as well. And all of the women that are introduced are not one-dimensional. They really have a very interesting story, background, and they do have some influence, either in politics or in other realms. So I do quite enjoy that. I have seen some people criticize Ruka and say that he feels like a Gary Stu character. And they said that after reading the first book. I would say that I don't really agree with that because he doesn't have it easy and not everything goes his way, even in the first book. But I can maybe see what they mean with that he maybe feels overly powerful. I would say definitely continue reading the series because one, it gets explained slightly, and two, I think at the end of the third book, you're not going to say about any of these characters that they feel overpowered and like anything could happen, because that's definitely not true. I think that the main characters as well as the secondary characters are all morally grey, and they are different in terms of how morally grey they are exactly, but you don't have any really good characters, you don't have any really bad characters. And I think that, again, at the end of the trilogy, you can understand all of them. Even the big evil guys that you have in this story, you can understand their motives and why they are the way they are. I also think that some of the characters that you are rooting for in the beginning might make you second guess once they do stuff that are just completely morally wrong. And I do like that. But like I said, all of the actions are explained and you can understand why they are doing it, even though you might not agree with it. So that's why I wouldn't say that it's the grimmest of the grimmest, where you are following characters that you just don't understand. That's not happening here. All of them are very extensive and they have a lot going on. They are multi-dimensional, all of them. And because you meet them while they are growing up, you can also see why they are the way they are, which is something that I quite enjoy. So for characters, definitely A+. So to conclude, I hope that it's clear that I absolutely love this trilogy and that I would recommend it to any grimdark fantasy fan, especially if you like character-driven stories with an extensive world building that's tied into culture, religion, politics, and so on. And especially if you want to know about a very unique magic system that you get to know along the way. I don't think that this is the series for you if you expect a fast-paced story from the get-go and if you want a very lineated magic system from your first page on, because that's not what you're getting here. Even though I would still recommend anybody who just thinks that this sounds somewhat interesting to pick it up. Even if you're new to grimdark, I think that if you like something like A Song of Ice and Fire, which some people just call dark fantasy, you will be fine with this trilogy as well. So please let me know in the comments down below if you have read the Ash and Sand trilogy already and what your thoughts are, or if you have it on the list and when you plan to read it. As always, I hope that you enjoyed the video and see you next time. Bye!